Perfect, and that should be it. So that should be live. So welcome to everyone who's watching this right now and everyone who's going to be jumping on afterwards and seeing the replay. So today we've got Keiran and Yasar on the podcast. Thank you both so much for coming on. How are you?
Good, very good. Thanks for having us, Neil.
No worries.
Thanks.
Cool. Good stuff. All right, so for people who don't know who you are, Keiran, do you want to do a brief introduction? Then Yasar, do you want to follow up?
Sure, happy to. So yeah, as you said, my name's Keiran. I am currently our head of executive recruitment at Zalando. So my role is mainly focused around building a strategy to bring in executives to the organization. And previous to that, I was the head of talent acquisition for OLX, which is a classifieds business globally. And then before that, I spent 4 years with Booking.com, where I was a senior manager in recruitment, focusing on product and technology. So lots of experience working for kind of hyper growth scaling companies. And I am originally Scottish.
Very nice, very nice. Thank you very much, Yasar.
Yeah, thank you, Neil, for inviting me to be a guest on your HomeCast. So my name is Yasar Ahmed. I'm currently the head of tech talent acquisition at Zalando. I've been at Zalando for the last 7 months. I think the main responsibility is to kind of really focus on the technologies side of hiring. Previously to that, I was the director of strategic hiring and redeployment at Wipro. It's just shy of 6 years there, really focusing on kind of senior leadership hiring and internal mobility.
Fantastic. Yeah. So to give everyone a bit of context, the way that this sort of came about was Yasar and I met a long time ago when he was at Wipro. I think you were still there at the time, and had this sort of hour conversation with Yasar in this coffee shop, and understood about half of what Yasar was saying because he knew so much more about how to structure internal teams than I thought I'd ever learn. And from that moment, I thought Yasar's going to be a great person to keep in contact with over the years when I ever need advice on anything like that. So we started talking about it, and that's when Yasar was talking about ideas around how you should, during the crisis, during what we're experiencing right now, how restructuring teams internally and the agility that you need to do that, and how to change how you're doing your hiring. Looking internally, I think was the phrase that you used. Rather than before you end up looking externally, is the subject of what we're going to be talking about today. Also, a little bit about your personal experiences. We'll start off with that, and yeah, we'll hopefully we'll get some good value out of this. As always, I'll be clipping out the best bits from this and putting them out at the end, and putting them out to all the different channels that we're on at the moment. So yeah, I mean, first question, first topic to talk about. It's just generally, how are you finding it right now? Things seem to be changing every single week. I know that you're in different countries as well than Keiran. I know you said you're in Berlin, and it's obviously we're having a slightly different experience here in the UK. So I think it'd be really interesting for people to hear, what is the sort of the attitude right now where you are around the current crisis from both a personal and sort of a professional standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to go first. So I think personally, I mean, it's been very difficult. I think it's very difficult for everyone, and I'm definitely one of the more fortunate people. When it really started feeling the change was, I think, back in early March, and I was actually back in the UK in Scotland, and I ended up being stuck there for 3 weeks before I could actually get a flight back to Germany. Right. So I think personally, it's been difficult. I think, but you see these really, really inspiring stories. So I think my sister and my mum both work for the NHS. Mum, 41 years for the NHS. She retired 4 years ago and then went back to work. So that's been really inspiring to see as well. And it's just about adapting. I think I've personally seen a difference in my life. Like, if you don't feel like your life's affected, you're probably not doing what you're meant to be doing, essentially. But it's a learning curve, and I think a lot will change when we come out of it, and hopefully a lot of positive things will change in the world as well. I think professionally, it's been a very interesting experience. I think kind of going from one day having the full team into the office to suddenly trying to be a remote organization. I think Zalando, we're 14,000 employees, and we have this kind of strong ethos that a team under one roof is a very, very strong team. So lots of the teams have pulled together, and we've been able to really yeah, really change our way of working. But I honestly think like there was a few bumps across the road in the first 2 to 4 weeks when we were finding our feet, what was our focus, etc. But I think now we found a rhythm, and teams are more, they feel more accountable, they feel more trusted, they're more inspired, they've got the clear accountability, what they need to focus on. I think a big part of that is having strong leaders around you, so people that are able to give you empowerment and also delegation. I mean, it's just the beginning. I think like for professionally, there's going to be so many changes, not just in talent acquisition, but for all organizations. And I think Zalando's in a very good place, that we have very strong leaders, and we're very much a people first company. So we look after our people. And I think we'll come out much stronger, and there'll be a lot of learnings that we'll take away.
Yeah. Sorry, go on, Yasar.
I definitely resonate with that. I think obviously we work for the same organization, so we've seen some of the challenges together. So a lot of what Keiran says, I have the same opinion on. I think for me personally, I've become very introspective, looking within, seeing how things around me are changing the way I think about things. I have a young family, I live with them. Obviously I live with them, but I mean, it's the forced approach to kind of staying at home, being locked in. I think that's the harder part for most people, because I think a lot of companies do offer the flexibility to work from home, but it's now like you're there 5 days a week, and that's where it becomes quite tiresome. You get screen fatigue for a lot of employees as well. So organizations like Zalando and other organizations, similar size, even startup sizes, we've been trying our best over the last 2 to 3 months to create as much engagement with our employees. And I think sometimes we've over communicated to some degree, right? And personally, I feel like it's about agility and constantly changing our approach, because this is really unprecedented. This is a very fluid situation. No one really expected this. So there's no right way of moving forward. It's just about constantly reevaluating what we're doing and moving forward in iterations and constantly changing. So that's my personal take on it. I think from the business side, it's very similar to what Keiran said, having strong leaders, being very transparent, and creating an environment for learning and making mistakes, because now people, and especially the younger demographics, who may be staying at home alone or in a studio apartment, or who might not necessarily be able to interact with too many people, they might not feel like they have that safe space to talk to about their mistakes. So it's just about being very empathetic.
Yeah, it's interesting that you both sort of touched on that same point, and it's something that's sort of been resonated with almost everyone I've spoken to so far around that sort of. There is now this, it's Mental Health Week this week, so it's something that a lot of people are having a lot of thought about, and specifically around what we're doing now, the obligation almost for companies to ensure that their employees are in the right sort of mindset from a mental health perspective is super important. And there was also obviously that obligation beforehand, but I think now more than ever, there is now this sort of need for people to understand and empathize that we're all in very different positions. Even though we're in the same crisis, we're all in very different positions. And, some people might have a home office, right? But some people might not, and they might be, they might have 2 kids that they're looking after at the same time. So everyone's in very, very different positions. And I think that that's exceptionally important to remember. You both also said one thing that I think is important as well. A lot of people that I've spoken to, and who's, people that I've spoken to around how their business is doing, have just said, yeah, it's all been great. We knew what we were doing from the beginning. And I can't accept that and believe that. But you both touched on the fact that there were challenges, but that you have managed to adapt and change to this scenario, these situations, of the working from home, going from that, I think you said 14,000 people in one building or one sort of one company, to everyone working remotely. So I think what would be really interesting for people would be to hear about what some of those challenges were for you guys, from both your perspectives, and then also how you overcame them. on the sort of route of what we discussed before, Yasser, that need to be agile and the need to be able to change. What would be some challenges, and then the solutions that you came up with for those?
Maybe I can give it. Keiran, you can go.
No, please, Yasar.
So, working. I think it really depends on the organization. Yeah, right. If you're talking about global organizations where they have cross-country teams, they may be already used to a working style and have the managers already have behaviors in them that allow people to become more autonomous. And I think for us as an organization where there's a lot of human interaction, we would create really human-shaped experiences. We're focusing on creating an environment that's ergonomic for its employees. That for us suddenly changed overnight, right? So where I think the learning curve for a lot of managers and leads and even just individuals and I think they all have to change the adaptive working style and how we interact. And I think there's a lot more autonomy now with remote working, because you almost have to trust that, okay, this is the objective. And I think key focus here should be on OKRs as opposed to KPIs, because if individuals within the teams understand the larger goal, it's a lot easier to kind of keep focused on that. I think that's where we've been driving as an organization around our OKRs, one common goal, have a clear vision, a mission statement, objectives. And I think the team, I think you'd have to be very naive, like you said, to think that you've just cruised through this and thought, it's still very uncertain what's going to happen in the future, right? There could be a second wave. There could be circumstances around the economy and how that's going to hit us and change us. So one thing's for sure, though, definitely won't be the same.
Yeah. So sorry, Keiran, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I think Yasar agreed. I think, some maybe more personal challenges that I've seen and faced is, it's what you said, is like, it's this human approach and recognizing that overnight every single person's life is dramatically changed. And I think like one of the issues we seen right at the start was a lot of people feeling that they were always working when they were working from home. So there wasn't that like experience of you go in and you have your day and then you go back to your family, and there was this almost like need that they felt they had to be online, and us as leaders need to kind of set that feeling that that's not the case. Actually, you should just approach your day as a normal working day. And I see that a lot with like a lot of mothers and fathers that are, I've been on calls with Yasar when his kids have ran into the meeting and maybe he has to stop the meeting. And I think a lot of organizations just need to use common sense, but also make people understand that it's fine, and that's normal. And even more so, I think we, Zalando's an organization and a global organization. I think in Berlin alone, we have about 130, 140 different nationalities. And we were continuously moving people to Berlin. And I had 2 people who joined my team that relocated from different countries 2 weeks before this happened. And, you move to a new country, you're super excited about joining an organization like Zalando, but the other part is you move for an experience, and now they were almost trapped in their house without having that group of network people, etc. as well. So I think there's the part where you need to focus on the strategy and the business and reevaluate where you are. But I think as an HR organization, you also need to focus on people, because ultimately the business isn't successful unless people are in the right place.
Yeah. Sorry, go on. Yasser, did you want to say something?
What's really interesting is that there are the impacts of this in the future, as I said, was still unknown, right? But one thing's for sure, organizations like WeWork, etc., and having offices, that's all kind of back to the drawing board, because like, well, do we have an office to kind of create team cohesion now? Do we need to work from the office? But I think there's still to some degree a need, and I think a lot of organizations are going through a bit of a thinking process about how they approach the future and what should they do, and has this benefit them in to some degree, kind of teaching them new skills? I think one thing's for sure is that you should definitely be looking at this situation, thinking, have we been able to kind of teach our workforce to kind of be more collaborative online? So that's something that I've observed.
Yeah, I think there's so many things that are now going to have to be looked at and changed from a HR perspective. I've spoken about this previously, but sorry, to go back a little bit to what you were saying about Keiran, about people switching off at the end of the day. I had a guest on here not that long ago called Emma Hislop, and she said that one of her managers, and this is the reason I'm saying this again is because I think it's a fantastic piece of advice to keep your staff and yourself sane. What she would do, her boss at the time, she would delay all of her emails. So, I work till, late in the evening, but that doesn't mean I can expect the people that work with me to do that. So any emails that, and I'm sure, you both do as well, but any emails that her boss was going to send, she would delay them all until 8:30 the next day. So even if she was working until, 10, 11 o'clock at night, no email would be received by any of the people that she worked with until 8:30 the next day. And just, I think things like that now more than ever are super important for people to be looking at. And then, Yasar, to your point, I think it's so important right now to be looking at everything to do with working from home. I think, how your employee's desk is set up. Do they have the right chair? Do they have the right mindset? Of course, we're making allowances, and I think you'd have to be a super cruel human being to get annoyed if someone's kids runs in the background right now, because how could you not understand that that's the situation we're in?
That image of that video of the news report, I don't know if you've seen it.
The BBC one.
Yeah,
I know, it's great. It's so funny. There's one of the funniest stories I've heard so far is someone was they had their cat was jumping up on the table, and their cat was just turned around and showed its backside to this whole conference that this person was on, and it was they were running the conference, and it was really important, and they said everyone just burst out laughing because we're in that situation now where we need to understand, and I think that people are doing that more and more. What I'd love to know from you guys is, I think you both said at some point it's never going to be the same. What normal looks like from now on is not going to be the same. That doesn't mean it's going to be worse, doesn't mean it's going to be better, but I'd love to hear what your personal thoughts are around, do you think, or would you like to work from home indefinitely? Do you think it should be 2 days at home, 3 days in the office? Do you think there should be maybe decentralized offices closer to where people live that they could go into 2 days a week? What would perfect look like for you guys? And what do you think the industry as a whole is going to sort of end up deciding is best? Because companies are now going to be judged on the decisions they make about this, I think.
I think me and Yasar have different opinions on this, so
great.
Make it interesting.
Have an argument would be great.
Do you want to go first, or?
Yeah, I'll go first. So I'm an advocate of work from home. I think it allows people the freedom to kind of focus on their work and not worry about, traffic or traveling in, commuting. I think it also allows freedom of talent and choosing talent globally without worrying about, technically importing talent to a certain location. I think there are pros and cons, definitely. I think the pros being that there's a lot more flexibility. I think the cons being that sometimes, you genuinely can't replace human interaction. Yeah. And that those experiences that you gain in person are, I think, to some degree, it's impossible to replicate virtually, unless you've got VR or something like that. But, the little things like going for a walk or, even meeting each other in the hallway, I think those things are definitely very difficult to replicate. And I think those are what make us and bond us. And I think we've, just an example, like you can make the mistake of going overboard and trying to replicate those by creating coffee meetings, lunch hours, fitness hours, all sorts of different initiatives. The next thing you know, you've got 2 to 3 days worth of meetings a month, which are completely irrelevant, not productive. So I think there's definitely some merit in in working from home. I do, however, believe that offices of the future will become more meeting spots and hubs for employees to come together. I don't think it'll be, I think there'll be a lot more hot desking. I think there'll be a lot more open breakout areas where people can come together, brainstorm. I think that's where home working sometimes struggles. When you really want to brainstorm, get together, spend a long time, moving forward. It really depends on the type of work as well, right? But that's my opinion. I think it will be a mixture. I think there should be definitely more freedom. I think in the perfect world, I'd say that it's up to the employee, right? Yeah. Because if you make them accountable, and as long as they understand what they're being measured on and they are going to be accountable for their deliverables, then I think it's up to them. But it's really about shifting that mindset to say, okay, I'm going to give you autonomy, but I'm also going to make you accountable.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a deeper discussion. For me, there's like this practical part that you need to realize as well, is I think you can't just be based anywhere in the world. I mean, there's taxation that's an issue. There's social security contributions that you need to pay. There's legal reasons. And I mean, I remember when I worked for Booking, I had to help support setting up an office in the US in Seattle, and then reporting back into Amsterdam. There was a 45-minute period, which was where we were both on the same time zone, and the end of the starting of the working day. And it's super difficult. So I think there needs to be some common sense on where do you apply it, and how flexible are you in terms of what does remote working look like. For me, I agree. I think there definitely needs to be more focus on how to make it work and how can you make people more productive. I would say that it would be a mix of whether someone's in the office for 2 weeks out of the month or someone's in the office for 3 days out of the week, is where I see the balance. I do believe that teams are more productive when they're together and they're in the office and you can just get in a meeting room and very quickly hear everyone's point of view and kind of come to a consensus and a decision. I don't think that you cannot do that remotely, but at least in my experience, it's not as productive. And I mean, I even think of an example with Yasar where I think there was 4 or 5 of us in a bar after work just having a drink, and there was an issue with data, and someone just said something and we solved the issue there and then with data. And that was just like one of these like coffee points, like, you go to the coffee machine, there's 4 people at the coffee machine, how's your day been, this is a problem I'm facing, and boom, you go back to your desk and you've got an answer to something. And they're very unique experiences that will be hard to replicate if you go completely remotely. But it's very personal to someone, and I think organizations need to apply common sense, but do need to find a way to be more flexible. Absolutely.
Just interesting you say that, because I totally agree, and I just recall trying to remember back on how I was working at Wipro, and I remember for my team in the UK, they decided amongst themselves that they would work from home on a Wednesday and a Friday as a team. So that way, when someone comes into the office, they know that the rest of their team members are with them in the office. And then when they're not home, when they're all working from home, they know they're working from home. So they create their own balance, because exactly what Keiran said, sometimes these very unique moments and I recall that moment specifically, so thanks for bringing that up. But that was a really kind of a eureka moment where we're like, wow, what, we just solved a year problem in the space of 2 sentences. And I think, yeah, you're totally right there, Keiran.
Yeah, and I think if we don't become more flexible, I think organizations will suffer as well. I think that you limit the people that you can hire. Like we face it at Zalando. When I worked at Booking, we face it, the rule at some organizations, they have to relocate to that country, and some people's personal situations just that's not possible. So I think where you can have flexibility and it's possible and you can make it work, then you should explore that, absolutely. But yeah, there's a fine balance, I think, that, and it'll be different to each organization. I think each organization has its own culture, and it's up for them to decide what suits best for them at that time.
Especially if you're a startup or you're a mid-sized organization. If you're a global organization like an IBM or Amazon, where you've got offices in over 100 countries, then it might be slightly easier to kind of hire talent, and you still have an office so people can still go to a certain place. Because I know that's how we were in Wipro, where we had offices in pretty much 72 different countries. So if someone couldn't join the UK, they could join in Amsterdam or Germany or wherever else. But then still come to the UK as and when they needed, but they would have like a Europe remit. So it really depends on the level as well, but I definitely agree when it comes to a startup environment, it's definitely really difficult to kind of adopt. I know GitLab do it very well. They do 100% remote working, and they work on a very transparent model. Every single interaction is done by video, but as I said, it really depends on the industry, the work that's being done, the roles that are being played remotely. I don't think it's something we could brush, with the entire, working world with. Say, hey, you're all going to go remote.
Yeah. I think it's interesting, and I try not to talk about what I do as much as possible on this, but I work for a company called Recruited, and we went fully remote working about 3 months before this whole thing happened. And so I was already used to working from home. I did find that my girlfriend had stolen my spot in the kitchen on the first day that she worked from home, which she continues to work at. But we'd gone fully remote working, and also we had a team in the Philippines that were fully remote. And one of the things you said, Keiran, about the time zones, a lot of the people over in the Philippines were used to working UK and USA hours. They were already, that was sort of their daily routine. I think the point you make about the visa issues and taxes is going to be a nightmare. But I think the important thing to remember, and you both touched on this, is that the best people don't always necessarily live near where your office is. That's just a given, right? And the opportunity now to hire someone from Scotland to work in somewhere in Barcelona, for example, or somewhere else around Europe where that might not be as much of an issue, is fantastic right now. And I think that the companies that capitalize the most on the opportunity to hire from other places around the world are the companies that are going to thrive from having that talent within their business. But they're going to have to be very careful and very structured around how they go about that. So I think what you talked about before, Yasar, was super interesting. This is the conversation we first had on WhatsApp, was about the agility and sort of structuring stuff so that you look internally rather than before you go and look externally. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and what you meant by that?
So internal talent mobility isn't just some sort of bench where you have employees who are not on projects, right? It's about understanding your employees. Most organizations, when they're assessing talent, they look at domain knowledge, IQ, EQ, and they try to fit someone for a role. And I think to some degree now we need to look at LQ, which is learning quotient, the ability and learning agility of an individual, and how quickly can they scale up to take on more responsibility or shift to a totally new role. And I think now more than ever, it's very important to understand your current workforce. What are they capable of? What is their previous experience? A lot of organizations, not people, but will look at their employees and what they're currently doing, but maybe discount what they've previously done in their past careers, right? You look at Keiran. Keiran worked for Booking.com. He was global head OLX, but if we were looking at him individually at Zalando, it might be just his current role, and how do we get a full picture of an individual so that when we're making decisions about how we're going to employ our future projects and how we're going to staff them, we can be a bit more introspective. But the second part to it is being able to not just post a role and hope someone applies internally, because that's the problem. If most organizations, that's a very basic reactive approach. When you want to start moving more strategically, you have an end-to-end system that automatically AI predicts what employee is going to be best and proactively reaches out to them. Now that is obviously more towards the future. There are companies that have adopted this approach and are close to it, but I think most, if not 90% of most companies are in that kind of middle spectrum where they kind of do a bit of reactive posting online and then a bit of proactive reaching out to employees, a bit of internal referrals. But I think the next step for us in moving forward is how do we create an environment where our talent acquisition teams can proactively reach out to employees and position roles to them to say, hey, hey, yes, I've got a great HR role for you. You're the head of TA for tech, but you may be interested in a P&O position in this business unit. And I might say, hey, well, am I in trouble? Why are you offering me a new role? And I say, no, this is just something we've identified for you. And I think that will be surprising for a lot of organizations to do because they feel like there's this whole no poach rule. But ultimately what you're doing is you're preventing someone from looking outside because you're presenting them with 4 other opportunities internally. And you're much better off positioning 4 positions internally and saying, hey, I've got 4 positions for you internally, don't bother looking outside. And then you improve your attrition rate, but not only that, you get more loyalty from your employees. You're probably more likely to get productivity increase. There's obvious disadvantages to that because you have this knowledge sharing, so you do have to put some rules in place, but that's where each organization has to take that decision themselves. I think the most important thing here is how do we get rid of that no poach rule?
Yeah. I think also you save money as well if you're a company that uses recruitment agencies, right? There's going to be a revenue aspect to it as well. But how do you use the phrase that I've not heard before? Was it agility on ability?
Learning quotient.
How do you measure that?
That is a difficult question to answer. This the $1 million question, right? I think learning agility is measured in lots of different ways. I think one part is through the work that an individual does, the interest that they show, the training, learning and development part piece as well. So how much they go into course trainings, etc. I think there is no fine way of assessing learning agility, and that's why I mentioned it. Right, we need to focus on how do you assess someone's ability to learn and adapt.
I agree. It is this slightly like a very vague word, but I think there is a way. There's examples that I see all the time in Zalando where there's someone who's been in a role for 6 years. Let's take, for example, marketing. Very, very strong performer, someone we don't want to lose, and they're unsatisfied in marketing anymore and want to go into somewhere else. And I think as an organization, you need to sometimes take a risk and give someone an opportunity to move into a different field because they've proved themselves year over year in this field, and they can learn a different area. And I've seen that many times, like people move into roles and then you start to actually be able to track like how many people have moved from marketing to P&O, from P&O to business side, from business side to product. And then you can see more and more success rate, and you'll start to get like some sort of idea of analytics. Like when we move people into different areas, is someone that's got high IQ, high business acumen, committed to the organization, committed to the values, working the principles in the way that we do, and can they be successful in a role that maybe they didn't study in? Absolutely. Absolutely. You take a much bigger risk hiring someone that you have no track record of other than a 5-hour interview versus someone that you have a 6-year track record of that maybe might take 6 months to learn some different areas.
Yeah. I think I was speaking to the CEO. I probably shouldn't mention her name. I don't know if she'd like me talking about this or not, but she's a COO of a large consultancy. It's sort of 15, 20,000 person consultancy somewhere in the world. And she said that she was never confident taking on a senior C-level position like that until she had done for at least 6 months to a year, every position that would be reporting into her. So she was a program manager for this business for a while. She worked in the dev team for 6 months as basically as a QA because she wasn't technically minded, she wasn't a programmer, but she still wanted to know how the whole thing worked, and so she could see it from that point of view. And she did that across multiple different companies for a long time. Essentially every sort of 5 years she would do something different and then go back to whatever makes sense at the time before she ever felt comfortable accepting that sort of COO position. And I think if we could get that sort of brought down maybe to everyone within the business, or sort of any sort of management position within a business, or bring it down all the way to junior people coming into the business, then you're going to find out that there's a lot more understanding around what's going on in other parts of what's working. So you'll often see people who are in the marketing team complaining about the sales team, for example. But if you've never worked as a salesperson, you wouldn't understand their challenges and their issues and their gripes, and vice versa, I think. And I think part of that learning ability comes from the exposure and the willingness to learn from those different departments. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I think like if you think of what your natural graduate program is, you go into an organization and you go into like 5 different areas and you decide where you go. Yeah, and I think what's missing in organizations is like, how do you replicate that 5 years down the line?
Absolutely.
And maybe one thing that I would also add is, and I think you just touched on it, Neil, which is so true. And when you said it, like I can make a guess of what the average cost per hire is for an organization. And if you took that money and then put it into learning and development into an organization, you could probably get people to where they want to be in a different area very, very quickly. And I think at some point organizations are looking into that now, but it's going to become much, much more important.
Yeah.
And you took the words out of my mouth, Keiran. You literally said it right. Look at how graduate programs, MBA programs, etc., postgraduate programs, they work. It's the same way. Give exposure to the individual to lots of different parts of the business.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if we had if you had one piece of after you're both very senior people in the sort of HR recruitment industry. If you had one, it could be 5 pieces of advice. If you had one piece of advice, 2, 3, 4, or 5 pieces of advice that you would give to people from, it can be a personal or professional standpoint, from what you've experienced so far, that they can take away from this podcast today, what would that be? And it can be about the agility and ability to learn. It can be about how to structure things internally. It can be about how you've dealt with your personal life. What would that one piece of advice be?
Yeah, maybe I answer it in a different way, and then if you want, you can push back, Neil. I think it would be more, rather to people, it would be to organizations. That would be my advice. And I think the advice I'd give to organizations is focus on your people. And I mean, absolutely, business continuity in these times is so important, but you need people to do business continuity. And I think there will be very tough decisions for organizations to make, but you need to make it in a human and focused approach that people understand, and over explain why you're making those decisions. And then I think we've touched on it, is like really focus on people and develop people internally, and you have an employee for life. I think people miss that. I think we're in an organization where in a place in the world where everyone kind of moves jobs every 2-3 years, which maybe is the way. But if there was more opportunities for people to move around and organizations put more focus on that, they could probably bring down costs and then repurpose those costs for more valuable focus for people. So yeah, my advice would be just companies to focus on your people, get your people strategy correct, and then allow the organization to keep going.
Fantastic. Yeah. I agree. I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because we've been saying this as people from the recruitment industry for years now, how, everyone, it's different now. People would stay at companies for 30 years before, they'd get a watch at the end of it. It'll be great. And now people would move every 2 years, but no one's really talking about why. I think that conversation hasn't really happened. I mean, I think this is probably the first one I've had in a long time about, well, then, why are people moving every 2 years? So I think that's a great piece of advice. Thank you so much. Yasar, what would you say?
Well, Keiran hit the nail on the head. So I think there's no point repeating what he said, just echoing most of the points there, but also adding around the agility piece, the key word being agile. And in the agile methodology, you have an iteration process, right? So being able to implement process changes quickly, but also communicate that this is a fluid environment, which requires that kind of mindset shift to more of an agile approach, which requires iterations, and there will be changes more regularly. And there might not be some consistency in that, but there will be changes to make it work. And I think that's something that employees need to understand, and also organizations need to understand how to over communicate as well. I think the gap is the over communication part. I think a lot of employees, as Keiran said, you want to create a very human shaped experience for them. And in most cases, that just requires you to be very transparent, right? And, over communicate and explain. Definitely focus on the people strategy and how we can invest in employees, and like that, the rewards down the road are potentially less attrition, less cost, and more and a happier workforce.
Yeah,
absolutely.
One thing I would add there, actually, Yasar, which I think you were alluding towards, which is super interesting, is I think employees and myself being an employee as well, is we need to recognize that organizations are going to make mistakes during this time period. And I mean, I've made mistakes already in the last 3 months. Absolutely. And I think that's something that we do need to always remember. I think it's a super, super difficult time for a lot of people. But it's a situation that none of us have ever been in before. And we need to learn, and we need to iterate, and we need to change our strategy. And it will be continuous like that, I think, for till the end of the year. And then let's kind of see where we are. But I think, we all need to recognize that mistakes will happen, and how do we work together?
Yeah, and I completely agree. And I think the amount of collaboration that's going on right now between companies that otherwise wouldn't have spoken to each other, or colleagues or acquaintances that wouldn't, is to my eyes unprecedented. And I love it. I love the fact that people are right now giving out advice like you guys have. And it sounds like from your perspective, how you guys are looking to structure and how you guys are structuring right now internally for Zalando is so focused on the people that work for you, and the people that promoting from within and looking internally, and giving people that extra exposure to other areas of the business is something that I think everyone should be doing. So it's really fantastic to hear that. It's something that I know you spoke about before, Yasar, and it's great to see that that's something that you've taken forward and are running with at the moment. So that's all fantastic, and thank you so much for the advice. I think that they're going to be great clips that I'll put out afterwards for people, and it'll be really insightful. All I do hope to get out of these podcasts every time is if we can encourage, inspire, or help one person at the very least, then that's a success to me. From what we've done, is there any last points that either of you'd like to make before we drop off?
Thank you for inviting us.
Well, thank you so much for your time. And
as you said, I hope we've shed some light on our opinions, and hopefully someone will find some value in this.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, same. Thanks, Neil. I really appreciate it. I found it a very insightful conversation, and a super important one as well.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, look, thank you so much for your time. I know you're both very busy guys, so I will we'll end it here for today, and I'll send out all the clips probably tomorrow, whenever I get time to clip them all together during the podcast and work. So yeah, I'll clip them all together and I'll put them out at some point tomorrow or early next week. But thank you so much for your time, and yeah, I'll catch up with you both soon, hopefully.
Take care.
Thanks, Neil.
Thank you so much. All right, cheers, guys.